Well, the title of the album is High and Dry. Why the album is called High and Dry, I have no clue really. We had a song called High and Dry, which got worked. We kept the title, but we kind of put a bracket Saturday night after it and turned it round on itself, because originally on the demo, I think I was just singing High and Dry and some other line. And then we turned it around to Saturday night, High and Dry. I don't know, it was just one of those things that stuck. It wasn't anything specific. It was nothing that we put a great deal of thought into, to be quite honest. It just, once we got kind of started on the record and we just mentioned, somebody said, call the album High and Dry, nobody really argued with them. So I don't even know where it came from. I'm not suggesting for a second it was my idea. It could have been anybody's. It just ended up being called High and Dry. Well, once we'd started recording the album, and this is our first album with Mutt Lange, remember, we were kind of in a mindset to kind of notch up a gear from the previous album. We had no input whatsoever into the artwork of On Through the Night. It was just delivered to us, this like drawing of a truck driving past the moon, which, to be quite honest, we all thought was a bit ridiculous. But then, we started working with this top-notch producer called Mutt Lange, and we started to feel our way into being in this band a little bit more, and decided that we wanted to work with a named art guy, notably Hypnosis, who'd done all these sleeves that we grew up looking at all our teenage years, from Pink Floyd to Led Zeppelin to UFO. I mean, the Hypnosis sleeves were everywhere, and we really, really wanted to work with Hypnosis, and we didn't really get much of an argument from the record label. And in fact, Peter Mensch, who was managing the band at the time, was quite vocal in our favor that we should work with Hypnosis. So we got to work with a guy called Storm Thurgson, who sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was the guy that came up with the idea, and we just basically looked at a bunch of designs that he'd kind of come up with. And what they do, these guys, they're just constantly working, and they just show an artist maybe 10 or 12 sleeves and they pick one. I've heard many rumors that High and Dry was I think it was a reject of Gumma by Pink Floyd, but it worked great for us. High and Dry, there was like this empty swimming pool. It was all a kind of tongue-in-cheek, humorous kind of nod towards that, really. But that's the way it goes. There's hundreds of stories through the history of rock and roll of album sleeves that are iconic once they get used, but somebody says, oh, I turned that down 10 years ago. And that's the story that we heard about the sleeve, was that it was rejected by Pink Floyd for the Gumma album, but we dug it. We thought it was really cool. The song On Through the Night was kind of a fashionable thing to have a song on your album that would previously been an album title. Notably, AC/DC had a song called If You Want Blood on Highway to Hell that had been the title of their live album the year before. And that's kind of just one of those things that was in our mind. We were working with Mutt Lange, who'd produced that said album Highway to Hell in the same studio, Battery Studios in Willesden in London. And he was just talking to us one day, and he said, there's no song on your first album called On Through the Night, is there? And we're like, no. He goes, it's a good title. And we had a bit of music knocking around that needed a chorus, and all of a sudden we started singing over the top of it. It's like, there you go, we've got a chorus for this song. It was literally that simple. But it just seemed to be there was one or two artists that were doing it. There's others, and I can't think of them right now, but AC/DC was a specific one with If You Want Blood, You Got It. The songwriting process for the whole album was extremely different to the first record. The first album was just songs that we'd been playing live for a good 18 months or so. With the second album, we were starting from scratch with absolutely no material, and the little material we did have, we dissected it piece by piece with Mutt Lange, which is something we'd never done before. So it was a total learning curve for the band. We'd come in with a song like When the Rain Falls, for example, which was a kind of a real up-tempo rocker, and Mutt said, we're going to slow this right down not to ballad speed, but like to mid-tempo speed, and those lyrics have got to go, and that turned into a song called Let It Go, which happened to be track 1 of the album. Bring On the Heartbreak started off as a song called A Certain Heartache. It just didn't sound as punchy, but melody-wise and lyric-wise, it was pretty similar. Backing track-wise, it was almost identical. So the songwriting process just kind of, it went through peaks and troughs, really. We came in with some songs that were almost finished. We came in with some songs that we thought were finished, and Mutt would say, no, it's not, and he would take it and tear it to pieces and put it back together again. So the whole album was a learning curve for us. But as we were listening to it progress, we were obviously noticing that it was so much more punchy than the first album. So we were going in the right direction. The difference between, say, Tom Allen, who was a fantastic producer, and I will not say a bad word against him, but a totally different way of working, and say Mutt Lange, it was the discipline. Tom was employed by the label to capture what we were, which was a teenage band, a young teenage rock band, capture the energy that they have, and let's see where it goes. With Mutt, it was a totally different kind of discipline, if you like. You know, he came in and he's like, well, I'm not just going to capture what you do and see if it's a bit better than the first record. We're going to actually create this record and make sure that it is better than the first album, and it's punchier and it's more mature, it's more professional sounding, it's more, you know, going to push you performance-wise. He's really, really pushed us hard, to the point where sometimes I'd be like going, I can't do what you're asking me to do. You know, I'm trying to like get Tom Waits to sing like an opera singer or something. And it was just really hard for me to get my head around it a lot of the time. But eventually it started to sink in what he was doing. And he got performances out of everybody in the band that we wouldn't have got under our own steam. So yeah, it was almost like army discipline, really. But I've said many a time that I'd much rather dislike the making of a record if I can enjoy listening to it later than have a really good time recording it, but then wish we'd tried a little harder to make it better because we were having too much fun while we made it. So it swings and roundabouts. So we were at that point in our career where we were still learning how to work through new songs. We'd never played any of these songs ever before we recorded them in the studio. So it was a totally different headspace to On Through the Night, where we'd been playing those songs on stage all over the world pretty much. And we had to start all over again. Mutt Lange was a great captain. He was a great leader to take us. And we were just a bunch of young kids. You've got to remember, Rick Allen was still only 17 years old. I think I was 21. Everybody else was like 18 or 19. We were rudderless. We really were. And he gave us a direction, which is what we desperately needed. For me personally, the hardest one was Bring On the Heartbreak, because Mutt had spotted probably way in front of us that was the song on the album that was probably going to bring some attention to the band. You know, we had great rockers with things like Let It Go and the title track and Hit and Run, songs that over the last 20 odd years have fleeted in and out of our set still. In fact, Let It Go still gets played all the time. But Bring On the Heartbreak, I think he recognized, with it being a ballad probably, that it would get airplay if it was deemed good enough. So he really put me through the ringer because it's all about the vocal. And I was just this young kid that just wanted to get on with it and get it done. And he's like, no, it's got to be better than that. And he pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where I kind of broke. And I said, I can't do this. And I just kind of threw my headphones down and had a hissy fit and pissed off out the studio. And I went next door to Battery 2, where Whitesnake were recording, and bumped into David Coverdale and had the misfortune of watching him do a vocal in one take, and thought, well, I'm wasting my time here. But David was fantastic. He said, come in, and, you know, me, him and John Lord sat around the piano and we discussed the ins and outs of what it's like to be a singer, and he was explaining how he felt the same way when he first joined Deep Purple, and it's something that you rise above eventually, and you just have to get through it. And that talk and a bottle of brandy kind of sorted out my head. So the next day I went in the studio with a totally much better attitude, I must say. And I said to Mutt, I'm sorry about yesterday. Let's go for it. And, with kind of ironing out my head, which is what that little conversation with David and a bottle of Courvoisier did, I went back in there with a much better positive attitude, if you like. But it was still the hardest thing I'd done to date at the time. 1981 was a very difficult year for rock and roll, which we didn't realize at the time. You don't realize why certain things happen when they're happening until you read afterwards there was a recession or there was just nobody touring that year. But we also didn't do ourselves any favors by the album took a little longer than we hoped it would. We started it late because Mutt was working on Foreigner 4. We were due to begin High and Dry in September of 1980, and we didn't start it until at least February of 1981. So we'd lost 6 months there waiting around. In fact, while we were waiting, we were so hard up that I had to go and work on a building site. So having had a top 20 album in the UK and a top 50 album in the States, I was working on a building site through the winter of 1980-81. Not a pleasant thing to do, but very grounding, apparently. We got the album finished by about April, I believe it was. And I think, what happened was then we were kind of stuck with what we could do. We'd been offered and accepted the Rainbow Tour of Europe, but because the album got delayed so much, I do remember still being in the studio at 6 a.m., finishing off the vocal on a B-side, a song called Me and My Wine, while the rest of the guys were on a ferry heading off towards Germany. And I had to come in the next day, and I literally got there 20 minutes before we went on stage, and we hadn't had any time to rehearse, so we didn't really know how the songs went. And the one thing I remember the most is we opened up with Switch 625, which is the most ridiculous thing to do, but we had to do it because I hadn't got time to get ready to go out there and do a song. So it was all a mess, really, the first week or so on the Rainbow Tour, but it started to pick up as we went along. Just kind of glad there was no YouTube back then, because if any of that had been captured, it would have been disastrous for the band. After that, we headed off to the States. We did a little tour of the UK, which was a complete disaster, just half full halls, because we'd kind of got a lot of bad press following the On Through the Night album in the UK. But in America, we had a tour with Blackfoot doing theatres. And then we did some arenas and some theatres with Ozzy Osbourne, which was a bit of a pickup, actually, because in various places Ozzy was really popular, and we got to play in front of a lot of people. And it was just another kind of rung on the ladder for us to climb. And that was pretty much all we did on that particular tour was the Rainbow Tour in Europe. We did a disastrous headline tour of the UK, and then we were out with either Ozzy or Blackfoot in the States. There's no answer to that particular question. There was no budget. We were still a band that the record label were like hedging their bets on. They didn't start doing anything that we would notice until Pyromania. We started seeing full-page ads and stuff like that. There was very little going on. You have to remember that the High and Dry album was kind of like treading water when you look back. It looked like progress at the time, and it kind of was, because it was a much better record than On Through the Night. Proof of the pudding being that 3 of those songs still get played a lot on the radio to this day. But because the tours weren't that massive, they weren't that long, and it was 1981, and it was just a little weird. There is really, I don't remember an ad. I don't remember anything about any promotion. The only promotion was us being out on the road, trying to do what we can, obviously going in and out the odd radio station to talk about it. But when you're an unknown band, not many radio stations want to talk to you. So it was in pockets. There'd be certain areas, like maybe Portland, Oregon, where we were quite popular. There'd be one DJ that would want to do an interview, but we could be somewhere else and they wouldn't want to do it, I remember I did one interview on the 1981 tour where we were walking into the studio. We were driving to the studio, and we had the radio station on where we were going to do the interview, and it was like a scene out one of these comedy films where they said, and there's this band coming in we're going to interview soon, a 3-piece band from Germany called Def Leppard. It's like, where did they get that from? I mean, that's how unknown we were. So there was no plan.
You got the best of me. Whoa, can't you sing?
It's a tricky one, really, to pick a personal favorite song off High and Dry, because sometimes you get swung by the general public's vote, So Bring On the Heartbreak going into Switch 625 has always been a delight for me when we do it live, for 2 reasons. One, I just think it's great, and B, Switch, I get a chance to go off and towel down because it's instrumental. But it's always reminded me of those great songs from the 70s, as though it's one long song. You got Bring On the Heartbreak, which seamlessly joins onto Switch 625, the same kind of way that the end of Layla, there's a piano thing at the end of Layla, or Freebird just goes into a full-on solo at the end, or Stairway to Heaven or whatever. So I've always seen it as one long song, to be quite honest. But we played On Through the Night, the track On Through the Night, when we did Viva Hysteria in Vegas in 2013, and that was great to play live. We'd never ever done it. It was Phil Collins' idea, and he didn't even play on the original. I really like You Got Me Running off, I think it's track 1, side 2. It always reminded me of Kiss for some reason. It's just got that block chord commerciality about it. But I still really enjoy doing Let It Go live. Hit and Run's a fun song to do. It's really difficult to pick one, but I suppose I'd have to pick Bring On the Heartbreak because it shows a kind of a maturity. It still stands out now, 35 years later, as a good song. 35 years since the album was released. It doesn't seem that long because our career is just constantly evolving. It's not like we split up for 10 years and then we got back together. It's one part of our story. It's a building block in the whole process of what Def Leppard has become in the year 2016. It was a very important one at the time. When you look back at it now, there are bits of it that hit and there are bits of it that missed. But generally speaking, I think they call it the sophomore album, whatever, the second album, it was the start of where we were going to go. We got a lot of stuff out of our system on the first album because it's what we'd been playing live. If somebody had said to us, we want to take this song to pieces, slow it down, speed it up, we'd have been very resistant. But because with High and Dry, we were starting from scratch, we were open-minded, and we were so happy to be working with a producer like Mutt Lange that he was like a teacher, and we wanted to learn from him. So we were all moldable. It was like we were a big piece of Play-Doh, and he was this like rock guru, and we were prepared to get in the pit with him and wrestle it out, because we did have a lot of arguments and fights about direction, but we did take on board what he was trying to do, which was make us a better band. So my lasting memories are, it was an enormous learning curve for what would come with Pyromania, where once we'd toured High and Dry, albeit not greatly, but we had, and by the time we started doing Pyromania, which was a year later, what we'd gone through a year before recording High and Dry had sunk in, and we'd realized through people saying, wow, you sound so much better on this record than you did on the first, etc., that it was worth all the effort that you put in. So for me, that my lasting memory is, I can't believe it's 35 years ago, but it was a great learning curve for where we were going to go.